planificando y organizando nuestras salidas de casa. Hacerlo solo en casos específicos. Los cuidados y las precauciones son muy importantes. Si salimos de casa, lavarnos siempre las manos, evitar tocarnos el rostro, llevar consigo siempre el alcohol gel, usar siempre la mascarilla. Si utilizas las mascarillas simples, no olvides de utilizar doble mascarilla para una mejor protección y cuidado. El color celeste o azul, que es el impermeable, debe estar hacia afuera y no en contacto con el rostro. Incluir el uso del protector facial y respetar el metro de distancia. Nada es más importante que protegernos y cuidarnos, ya que al cuidarnos nosotros seguiremos cuidando y protegiendo a nuestras familias. No bajemos la guardia, por favor, y les agradecemos por la atención. Bien, señoras y señores, para dar inicio a este importante webinar internacional, dejo con ustedes al doctor José Macharé. Doctor Macharé, muy buenas tardes, bienvenido.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our guests, authorities, panelists, and participants in general. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the seminar Towards Resilient Societies, the Engineering Contribution, that is organized by the Committee on Disaster Risk Management of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, WFEO, and the Colegio de Ingenieros del Perú. I am José Macharé, chair of the committee, and I'm very happy to conduct this meeting. Today, we have 3 keynote conferences given by outstanding engineers. But before, we are glad to receive the messages from 2 special guests that are WFEO leaders. The first one is Professor Gon Ke, who is the chairman of the academic committee of the Nankai University and executive director of the Chinese Institute for New Generation Artificial Intelligence Development Strategies. Besides other responsibilities, he is member of the advisory committee of the Chinese Ministry of Industry and Information Technology and of the National Committee of Standardization. Professor Gon Ke, as president of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, we invite you to give the opening address.
Thank you, Jose. Good day. On behalf of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, I'm taking great pleasure during the festive time of the World Engineering Day celebration to extend our warm congratulations to the webinar Towards Resilient Societies, the Engineering Contribution, organized by our Standing Technical Committee of Disaster Reduction Management, CDRI in short. The World Engineering Day, an international day dedicated for engineering, is proposed by WFEO in 2018 and supported by more than 80 international and national engineering organizations. This proposal was finally approved unanimously at the 40th UNESCO General Conference in 2019, declared the 4th of March, the day WFEO founded as World Engineering Day for Sustainable Development. What are the significances of the World Engineering Day? I understand it is to increase dual awareness. On the one side is the public awareness, public and government awareness of the crucial role of engineering for achieving the SDGs. For thousands of years, engineering has helped solve problems of daily life and production needs of humankind by applying scientific knowledge, technical methods, design and management principles. Engineering has been a prime contributor to the survival of humankind on Earth and to improve our quality of life. It is contributed to our capability to survive disasters and the public health challenges, to secure food and water security, to communicate and transport, to innovate and create new products and new services. Wherever there is problem, there is a need for engineering solutions. Today, the foremost problem facing to the whole world is to sustain human development and preserve our planet. In this context, engineering has a central role to play. But this crucial role of engineering and engineers has not been sufficiently recognized by public and governments. Therefore, the World Engineering Day is set with the purpose to celebrate engineering achievements, to raise the social profile of engineers and engineering, to mobilize more resources to invest and promote engineering development, and to reach out to the young generation, especially young girls, to consider engineering as a career. On the other side, that the awareness is also the engineers' awareness of their role and responsibility of engineering for achieving the SDGs, to be engaged more proactively in implementation of the SDGs with accelerated actions. Actually, to fulfill the important responsibilities, our engineering profession also needs a transformative development, especially by enhancing and improving engineering education and professional capacity building, to have a deeper understanding of the SDGs with its multidimensional and interconnected features, and to have stronger capability to solve complex problems by utilizing advanced scientific knowledge and emerging technologies such as AI, big data, Internet of Things, and geospatial information, etc., with higher ethical standards to ensure the inclusiveness and left no one behind. Besides, for building resilient societies, international and intersector engineering collaboration must also be strongly promoted to bring together governments, civil societies, academic and educational institutions, industries, and other stakeholders to mobilize all available resources to respond to the pressing challenge, including COVID-19 and many others. Dear friends, dear colleagues, the theme of this year's World Engineering Day is Engineering for a Healthy Planet, celebrating UNESCO Engineering Report. On March 4th, a ceremonial event was successfully organized by UNESCO and WFU jointly, and the second UNESCO Engineering Report was officially launched. In the context of the decades of actions of accelerating the delivery on SDGs, this report clearly illustrates the role of engineering in achieving every one of SDGs, and analyzed the gap between current engineering development status and the requirement of the SDGs. This report is now available from UNESCO website. Apart from the main event, across the globe, over 100 events were organized by engineering organizations, academic institutions, and the business and industry sectors. Today's webinar is one of the series of global celebration of the World Engineering Day, and I firmly believe with the efforts of all speakers and participants, it will give important contribution to increase the dual awareness of the role of engineering in sustainable development, and in special context of building resilient societies. Thank you very much. May the event a great success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gonke. I have to remark the support of the Colegio de Ingenieros del Perú. We have here in the room to its president, Engineer Carlos Herrera Descalzi. Let's go. Our second guest is Dr. Marlene Kanga. Dr. Kanga was president in the most recent period, president of WFEO, and she has also been national president of the Engineers Australia. She is a fellow of the Academy of Technology, Science and Engineering Australia and member of the Order of Australia. Dr. Kanga has been listed among the 100 engineers contributing to Australia in the last 100 years as part of the Engineers Australia centenary celebrations. This in 2019. Please, let's receive to Dr. Kanga for the session introductory speech.
Thank you very much, Professor Mashare. It is a real pleasure and honor to be here. And also welcome the Decano, Dean of the College of Engineers, Engineer Carlos Herrera Descalzi. And all the distinguished guests and delegates who are attending this very important event. I'm going to share my screen. I have a few slides to present my speech. So if you will allow me to share.
It's okay.
Okay, thank you very much. As I mentioned, it's a great honor to be here speaking on the occasion of this event, Engineering Resilient Societies, the Engineering Contribution, as part of the celebrations of World Engineering Day. Briefly, for those who are not familiar with the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, or WFEO, we are the peak international body for professional engineering institutions, founded in 1968 under the auspices of UNESCO. And we have some 100 national professional engineering institutions as our members, and 12 international and continental and regional professional engineering institutions as members, representing some 30 million engineers. As you can see here, the dark blue sections of the globe representing where we have members. We are the co-chair of the Major Science and Technology Group at the United Nations. We have representation at all major UN organizations, and we are an associate of UNESCO. And I'm very proud that the College of Engineers Peru is a national member and hosts the Committee for Disaster Risk Management. In fact, I'm particularly pleased to be here today because I'm a founding member of this Committee of Disaster Risk Management, and I chaired a subcommittee until I took up my position on the board of WFEO as president-elect. I chaired a subcommittee on capacity building for natural disaster risk management, which in fact is my area of work. I'm a process safety engineer and have specialized in risk engineering and quantitative methods for assessing risk for both process safety and natural disasters. So it's particularly for me very important to be here today because of my professional interest as well. As Professor Gonke has mentioned, WFEO led the proposal to declare 4th March the founding day of the Federation as World Engineering Day. This declaration flows from a key objective of the WFEO, which is to advance the UN Sustainable Development Goals through engineering. We established this objective early in 2018, and we had a declaration on our 50th anniversary in Paris in March 2018 on our commitment to advance the Sustainable Development Goals through engineering. As part of that declaration, we worked with UNESCO for the successful declaration of World Engineering Day in November 2019. And this year we are celebrating the 2nd year. The UNESCO Engineering Report also began its work in March 2018. And I'm so pleased that the title of this report also evolved during this period and is now Engineering for the Sustainable Development Goals. It aligns with the vision of the Federation and shows the importance of the work that is done by engineers. In fact, the chapter that I have written has a table which shows how engineering and engineers can make it happen and contribute to each and every one of the Sustainable Development Goals, to communicate this very important issue to non-engineers in particular who don't realize the importance of engineering in everyday life. So here you see the cover of the report, Engineering for Sustainable Development, and you see a link here for the Spanish version, which I hope that engineers around Peru will download and read with great interest. In here, there are in particular, three Sustainable Development Goals, which are of relevance to the topic today of this conference, which is sustainable infrastructure, goal 9, innovation, which is goal 11, and climate change, which is goal 13. Because civil, structural, electrical, mechanical, environmental, software, and telecommunication engineers, and all other disciplines of very wide range are all contributing to safe, inclusive, and resilient cities, facilitating affordable housing and public transport, clean air, water and energy, and importantly, the protection of natural and cultural assets for greater resilience against natural disaster. And increasingly, we need innovation and advanced engineering technologies for energy and resource efficient buildings, smart lighting, efficient transportation systems, renewable energy, integrated water resource management, geospatial engineering, building information modeling, data analytics to make cities more livable. And this is very important because natural disasters can occur anywhere and at any time. While I was preparing this presentation, in fact, on the 5th of March, there were 4 earthquakes to the north of New Zealand, one magnitude 8.1, and tsunami warnings were given right across New Zealand, causing panic and traffic jams. You see here the tsunami map from the National Civil Defense Emergency Management Agency, which has shown where the heights of waves that can be expected around the northern part, 1 to 3 meters. And here you see a photo of the first wave arriving, the first tsunami wave at Tokomaru Bay at 10:33 a.m. on the 5th of March. So these natural disasters occur relatively infrequently in a particular location, but on a world scale very frequently. And so this puts into perspective the work of this very important WFO Committee for Disaster Risk Management and the work of engineers in building resilient societies. I'm going to refer to the work of engineers using the 4 R's. This is a systematic approach that has been adopted by the New Zealand Civil Defence Emergency Management Organization. And I have spent many years working in New Zealand in particular in terms of quantified methods for assessing natural disaster risks and developing risk management and mitigation options for these assets. So the first R is reduction, and engineering tools can be used for quantitative risk analysis to analyze the exposures to these risks. It's a combination of, for example, the seismic mapping for earthquake risk compared with the resilience of the assets, the standards to which they're built, and their vulnerability to damage, as well as the consequences of when they are damaged. And these approaches and techniques can be used for key lifelines infrastructure, such as roads, water supply networks, electricity supply networks, gas supplies, as well as high value assets such as refineries and gas plants. In fact, in Whangarei, the north of New Zealand, which was affected by tsunami, there is the most important refinery located there, which is vulnerable to these natural disasters and for where these quantitative techniques have been applied. And it's by understanding these risks from an engineering approach that we can then apply reduction methodologies, both soft options such as land use planning and location of vulnerable assets and communities like schools and hospitals, as well as the design of these structures. The next 2 R's, of course, is readiness and response. The community needs to be ready to respond, but also we need to have systematic responses, starting from early warning systems. And this is where engineering, again, is to the fore, with satellite monitoring, with geospatial mapping of where emergencies have occurred, and widespread communication using, for example, the internet, Twitter, and so on, to communicate to the community on what is happening. You see here some photographs of engineering is very important in the acute phase of response to such emergencies. And finally, the recovery stage is equally important, and where engineers have a very important role in not only in the acute phase of recovery, for example, assessing the safety of bridges so that roads can be opened to enable traffic and emergency response vehicles to travel on them, to also assessing, for example, the safety of buildings. Engineering New Zealand, for example, has a volunteer program using structural engineers that do triage on buildings after an earthquake, doing a quick review of the safety of whether these buildings can be occupied or not, with a placard system, red, orange, and green. And this is, again, important of how engineering is used to maintain the safety of people and enhance recovery. And of course, looking at long-term recovery and rebuilding, new building codes, for example, for seismic resilience, looking at materials, for example, water supply networks using more flexible material. These are engineering responses that will establish long-term recovery and resilience to such events. And such resilience is in fact important for sustainable development. And this is a key part of what engineering is all about. This role of engineering has been recognized, in fact, by the United Nations in their Global Sustainable Development Report, where science and technology has been recognized as one of 4 key levers in driving sustainable development. So we have a very important role to play more than ever. And finally, coming to World Engineering Day, as Professor Gonki has stated, this is an important opportunity for us to communicate with non-engineers in particular on the role of engineers and engineering. And the logo, in fact, emphasizes the key engineering aspects for sustainable development right at the heart and the center: blue for water, yellow for energy, orange for innovation, another orange for sustainable infrastructure, and red for education. And here you see the green for climate change goal 13, which is driving the imperative for greater resilience against natural disasters, which are getting more frequent from weather-related events. So finally, I would like to say congratulations on this very important event. You can see the importance of engineering and resilience is a key issue for us today. And I wish you every success in the discussions that are to follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marlene. Thank you. Let's go directly to the first conference that will be presented by Engineer Eric Ma Xiu Chen from Hong Kong. He is the CEO of NWS Holdings Limited in Hong Kong and a member of our committee. Engineer Ma was previously Secretary of Development of the Hong Kong SAR government, overseeing policy areas for land use planning and development, for land administration, urban renewal to infrastructure planning and construction, and building safety. Prior to joining the government, Engineer Mas was also Executive Vice President for Civil and Infrastructure Business for Asia Pacific region of AECOM, where he led many town planning and engineering studies, providing home for almost 1 million people. He is going to present the land use planning to build disaster resilience. The floor is yours, Dr. Ma.
Thank you, Joe. Dear President Goh and PP Canada, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good evening. So as the former Secretary for Development, let me maybe first share the screen. I think that will be easier for everyone. Okay. So as the former Secretary for Development in Hong Kong SAR government, it is my pleasure to share with you how Hong Kong engineers contribute to the land use planning process, which shape our cities and build resilient, disaster resilient into this Asia global city. First, Hong Kong, a tiny coastal city in the southern part of China, with a total population of 7.3 million. Total area is very small, just slightly over 1,000 square kilometers, with over 70% of hilly terrain. So most development area are packed in 24% of the city, with a lot of constraints and challenges. In addition, Hong Kong is highly exposed to the open sea environment, with no physical barrier protecting us. Every year, on average, about 5 to 6 typhoons hitting Hong Kong, and their wind speed can be as high as Category 5 hurricane. We are quite lucky. Our risk in earthquake and terrorist attack are quite low, based on past track record. Development are mainly confined in about 260 square kilometers. About 1/4 of these development areas are sitting on low-lying areas, as shown red in the map. Those red area, mostly reclaimed reclamation area, are less than 2.5 meters above the mean sea level. Not a lot for a storm surge. So you can imagine the challenges we face. The development pattern is generally high development density in low-lying areas, while development density lowers as the level rises. But it doesn't mean there is no high-rise building in high area. Look at this image. The tower is called High Cliff Tower, which is a 75-story luxurious apartment located on a very steep slope you can see in here, about 120 meters above the sea level. At 200 meters tall, 75 floors, it is dubbed as the tallest all-residential building in Hong Kong and the 95th tallest building in the world. We have the highest number of super skyscraper in the world, with over 500 buildings taller than 150 meters. On average, the new buildings are quite common, having a height over 120 meters or 44 in height. So a super high-rise building are mostly sitting in low-lying reclamation area, but with a lot of exception, like those shown here. So the force of nature is always the biggest challenge for engineers. In Hong Kong, we face various natural disasters every year. They include exceptionally heavy rainfall, storm surge, thunderstorms, and tropical cyclones. And also we have heat waves, drought, and rises in sea levels. Luckily, we don't have severe earthquake in this region. So they caused flooding, coastal erosion, landslides, man-made slope failure, building damages, transit incidents, and even potable water shortage, with potential of severe casualty and the devastation of transportation and other critical infrastructures. However, but how severe are those natural disasters? Let's have a look at the Sustainability City Index. It ranked Hong Kong as the city with the highest natural disasters risk in Asia. Fortunately, with the concerted effort of the community over the last 5 decades, Hong Kong has not had a large-scale natural disaster that caused significant economic losses or human casualty. So examples of natural disasters. The left picture here is a 12-story building originally sitting in this location. Its name is called Cold War Court. It toppled after a downpour in 1972, killed 138 lives in one day. The right is a recent incident. A seaside estate suffered from some of the worst damages as the severe typhoon Mundial swept through the city. Overtopping wave has reached the 5th floor in the building. You can see in here. Despite the geographic challenges and natural disasters we faced, Hong Kong still managed to score high for its infrastructure resilience. With reference to the UNISDR, this affirmed that Hong Kong owns a resilient infrastructure, utility and services that could support the city even under adverse events. Hong Kong's comprehensive land use planning process is very unique, with extensive engineering input at all the stages. This certainly is one of the critical factors that we could achieve such a resilient city infrastructure in facing the challenges which we talk about. Hong Kong's town planning process started quite late when compared with other global cities. It started in the 1970s as part of the government's new town development program. 9 new towns were built and now accommodated about 3.4 million population. Most of these new towns involve extensive engineering works, such as reclamation and cutting of slopes and knobs for extraction of filling material for the reclamation. We need to build a lot of seawalls, roads, bridges, tunnels, etc. So all this feasibility study of engineering works and also the subsequent design work were led by professional engineers like myself. Personally, I led the land use planning studies for major extensions of 2 new towns and the redevelopment of the famous Kaikoura airport. So those projects are challenging, involve a lot of engineering infrastructures. So during the development of this land use proposal, we had to ascertain the feasibility in all aspects, all these aspects shown in here. To a large extent, we built the disaster resilience into the development proposal through this process. Take a new development along waterfront as an example. Engineering inputs are vital at the very early stage. So a risk-sensitive approach has been adopted to assess the situation and to evaluate the mitigation and also the treatment measures. And more importantly, it's about striking a balance between the cost of the infrastructure and the residual risk that we need to face. Before we could actually assign different land uses on the drawing board, the project team will be required to review on the coastal hazards and the risk levels to determine the reclamation levels and protection work required, such as seawall types, wave walls, and buffer zones on the land uses. At the same time, with the extended drainage path, the hydraulic engineers, we also need to take care about the hydraulics of the hinterland, using numerical hydraulic models to formulate improvement measures, such as online improvement for low-lying area, fast storage tanks to delay the pitfalls in midstream, and even at extreme case, we'll intercept the surface flow at upstream using tunnels in order to give capacity for the low-lying area and development sites. So geotechnical and natural terrain hazards assessment is also part of the study to ascertain the suitability and residual risk, such as the avoidance of high-risk areas, provision of non-sensitive users along medium-risk area, or some debris flow catcher fence need to be provided. We also conducted extensive environmental survey simulation, modeling assessment to ensure the sustainability of the proposal. So after all this study, the town planner will consolidate all the engineering and environmental input and build up the land use budget. This will be an iterative process with several rounds of assessment and adjustments. Finally, the land use proposal will be transformed into an outline zoning plan for implementation and control through the town planning process. Our very unique features involved in Hong Kong government establishment is a strong, competent professional teams, engineers, planner, etc., with hands-on knowledge on technologies and modeling techniques. It was originally developed to oversee consultants' work, but over time, more knowledge and skill were accumulated over the last decades. These competent professional engineers can now regularly reassess the capacity, adequacy, and even a linkage between critical infrastructures in the city. They will propose upgrading or improvement works, and they will explore these options, and they will evaluate before proceeding with detailed study or design by the consultant. These in-house resources has proven to be very valuable in expediting development and implementation of critical infrastructure. Life is difficult, so I would like to share with you some of the surprises in the process. This is one of the examples in one of the land use proposal in a new town. In this new town, we built the foothill bypass in this area, so as shown in these aerial photos. Because of the hilly terrain and complex geology, some situation actually happened and a big landslide occurred. Despite completion of the stabilization measures, the geotechnical engineers consider the residual risk is still high. So this is a failure area. And with these measures, the geotechnical engineers still consider the residual risk is so high. Therefore, we change the land use. The downstream land of the highway was redesignated as sports and recreation uses, forming a buffer with the development and the slopes in here. So we need to make continuous adjustment. We will try our best to predict the situation, but sometimes we can't. We are engineers. We need to base on facts and the situation. This is another interesting example. This is one of the new towns we completed. To reduce flooding, the hydraulic engineers will certainly want the drainage channel to be as wide as possible. However, this is not always possible due to various constraints. Like in here, in this new town, this drainage channel is already 200 meters wide. 200 meters in Hong Kong is quite a lot. So in the extreme event, we know this channel will not be able to accommodate all the flooding, in particular, due to the typhoon surge. So we understand there will be a potential for overbank flood, though the chance is not high. To strike a compromise, we designate the floodplain here along the strip for amenity uses, like sports ground in this picture. Extreme events do occur in life. Like the above picture, the same location, the floodplain we saw in the last slide is now totally flooded. The sports ground is like a fishing pond. So all these affected facilities within the floodplain can be restored just within a days, within 1 or 2 days after the storm, with proper design and management. So to complement resilient infrastructure, an emergency response management system is equally important. It establishes policy, principle, and emergency responses operation for crises arising from natural disasters. And since 1996, Hong Kong has developed and instituted a 3-tier emergency response system in order to ensure timely and appropriate response. Tier 1 responses ensures that emergency services, such as police and firemen, will operate under their command. And Tier 2 response is triggered by an event that requires attention of the government secretariat, such as those that have threatened life, property, or major security issues that may require a more complex, coordinated response. So they will be coordinated by the Bureau, i.e. is the central city government. And Tier 3 is responses that will activate in the event of serious and widespread threat to life, property, and also security. So that requires significant government attention and action. So based on the past track record, the recovery period in most events will be pretty short. Recovery period, I mean that public transport can be running again on roads, on railway. People can go back to work and business can resume their operation. For Tier 1 events, the recovery period will be normally around 2 to 3 hours, while Tier 2 will still be less than 24 hours in most incidents. Apart from a comprehensive process, the government has embarked on a series of technical studies over extreme climate conditions, including heat wave, seawater levels rising, typhoon surge, rainfall, water supply, extreme wind, etc. After acquiring this technical knowledge, we would incorporate the potential impact arising from climate change and the mitigating measures into our planning and building guidelines to build a more resilient and sustainable city. Besides the above, the government is committed to dedicated sufficient financial resources to support the risk resilient initiative and emergency response management measures. So in conclusion, the resilient capacity of Hong Kong is solid and reliable with the engineers' contribution over the last 5 decades. We look forward to work with other cities and countries and share with them our engineers' experience in land use planning and building a resilient and sustainable city. Hong Kong is our beautiful city with an interesting skyline mixed between skyscrapers and natural ridge lines. So this is the city that I'm talking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric. A great presentation. I imagine there will be some questions at the end. Let's go to the second keynote speech. It will be given by Engineer Roger Fairclough. Roger is a civil engineer and fellow of the Engineering New Zealand. His career spans from government and private sector, including engineering design, construction, and government policy. He is an internationally recognized expert on infrastructure resilience. Roger is also an independent consultant with Neolif Global Limited. Its clients have included New Zealand Treasury, the Ministry of Transport, the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, the World Bank, and the ADB, the Asia Development Bank. Roger is going to present us the infrastructure as the key contributor to resilient societies.
Thank you, Jose, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. Also, thank you to Marlene and Eric for your prior presentations. And in fact, Marlene, you've done a very good introduction to New Zealand already. So that's a good segue into my presentation. So I will just share my screen. I'm hoping you can all see that slide. So that's the introductory slide. Yeah, thank you. So as Jose has said, my topic is infrastructure as a key contributor to resilient nations. I'm going to take you through some work that we in New Zealand Lifelines have undertaken a number of times now and give you a brief update on the current status. I'll first of all introduce New Zealand a little bit further than Marlene has, then talk about Lifelines, and then the study itself, and just conclude with Canterbury earthquakes. As Marlene has alluded to, we have events almost every week, so tsunami being but one of them. But what's useful here is to understand that New Zealand is a long way from most markets. We are heavily dependent on primary products, but in fact are more urbanized than France and Germany. We do have a challenging geography and we are hazardous. So I'm sympathetic to Eric not having earthquakes in Hong Kong, but believe me, we have our fair share. So the three key elements of infrastructure resilience and the way we operate are the first being robust physical assets, the second being effective relationships, and very importantly, pre-event and post-event. And thirdly, the end users with appropriate backup arrangements. So what is Lifelines? And in the New Zealand context, we have a legislative mandate under what's referred to as the Civil Defence and Emergency Management Act, and then a hierarchy of different documents and guidelines, and the bottom one being Director's Guideline for Lifeline Utilities. And lifelines, in this context, we refer to as energy, transport, telecommunications, and water. We're well aware that in some other jurisdictions that may well extend into fast-moving consumer goods and finance and banking, for example. We have quite a strong focus on resilient communities and also rely on our regions undertaking separate activities, looking at lifeline vulnerabilities. We in the New Zealand Lifelines Council, which has oversight, liaise very, very closely with government agencies, but also with infrastructure providers. So this document here is the third in the series, and we are looking to update this every second or third year, and more often if there are issues that are new issues that arise. So it's titled New Zealand Critical Lifelines Infrastructure, the National Vulnerability Assessment. If anyone is interested in the greater detail, then there is a website reference there. So this is a map of New Zealand. Marlene's photo was one taken near the northern end or the top of this map. But we very clearly, it's two separate islands. And we separate it into those various coloured regions. The work that the regions do is assimilated into this national assessment of vulnerability. So as an example, I'm going to take you through each of the sectors and really demonstrate the approach we take, which is to, for each of these sectors, identify the areas which have the greatest vulnerability as we progress into the future. I should add too that we try and look at what future changes are going to be, rather than necessarily just observe what's already existent and what we've experienced to date. So the New Zealand electricity system, for example, is long and stringy, going from the bottom of the South Island to the top of the North Island. Because of that network configuration, leads to various issues in its own right. But in fact, when we look at the total system, taking us through right from generation to consumers, one of the greatest vulnerability is the local distribution of electricity, where there are uncertainties and increasing unreliability of those networks. Clearly, climate change is something on the right, well, is here already, but we are already observing higher frequency, high windstorm events. We're also observing changing wind directions, which for some of our assets are causing problems. With respect to our gas system, I haven't got a map here, but essentially gas is only distributed in the North Island of New Zealand. But where the pipelines are, in many cases, they're prone to coastal erosion, landslips, and most recently, we've had third-party damage. So this is where the pipelines might be buried by a metre or two, and agricultural operations and other operations, people have damaged our pipelines. Another thing happening in New Zealand, partly associated with global reduction in fossil fuel emissions, is that our government is no longer issuing permits for offshore gas exploration, and potentially this will lead to quite a realignment in how energy is produced and consumed in New Zealand. Fuel, on the fuel side, we have one refinery, and around about 60% or 70% of our total refined fuel comes through that refinery. So this is the one that Marlene referred to. The rest of the fuel is directly imported from overseas. Not mentioned here, but a very recent development is that our one and only refinery may be closed, which means that we'll be fully dependent on imports from overseas. And in fact, we will also have problems with bitumen supply for our road construction and maintenance. With land transport, our road and our rail networks do tend to be in similar corridors and both exposed to similar vulnerabilities. And you'll see from these photographs here that some of the terrain they pass through is very steep, and both landslide events from heavy rainfall and landslide events from earthquakes have over the last decade or two caused significant problems. We also have volcanoes, just to add to the variety, and we have a number of located all in the North Island and distributed. One series of volcanoes are actually under our biggest city, Auckland, and in fact we have 50 volcanoes under there. Of most of our volcanoes, we really do not know when they may next erupt. The greatest vulnerability, apart from direct impact, is likely to be ashfall and interruptions to air travel, to our transmission network, and to our general operation of our vehicle fleet. The ports, in addition to volcano, the ports are vulnerable to tsunami, and in these recent events over the last 2 weeks, some of our port operations had to be suspended and people relocated to higher ground. So I'm being very selective here in terms of what I talk about, and obviously there's more detail in the slides themselves. With respect to the three waters of potable, waste and storm, there's major industry changes that are taking place now or are underway. And it's in recognition that many of our below ground assets are aging and reaching end of life. And so we're getting rapidly increasing reliability issues. In addition to those, there are the other threats on the horizon, obviously, of climate change, and then acknowledgement that many of the water networks are dependent on electricity supply. In telecommunications, the dependence is on a limited backup from electricity, and also we're very cognizant of the commercial imperatives. So this is a demonstration where we don't only look at the physical assets, but we do look at the incentives on the organisations that operate our infrastructure. And that's a nice segue into the consideration of interdependencies. So there's no need to look at the detail of these plots, but essentially what we are trying to do is look at the degree to which various elements of infrastructure are dependent on other elements of infrastructure. And the numbering, like a number of 3, says there is a very high dependency, and a number one is a low dependency. But in the New Zealand context, we are certainly saying to the public and others that if we lose one element of infrastructure, we more than likely have lost many others. And now just to lead into the conclusion, I just want to demonstrate a couple of some of our recent events. So one of the ones which is most globally known about is the Canterbury earthquakes in 2010 and 2011, and also the Kaikoura earthquake in 2016. So the first one had major impact in a city environment. The second one had major impact on one of our national networks. I'm just going to talk a little bit further about Canterbury earthquakes in 2010. So this is our city of Christchurch, our second biggest city. Rather uniquely in a global context, the earthquake of February 2011, its epicenter was right under the city. And to really demonstrate what the primary issue became, it wasn't so much the magnitudes of the event, but a series of subsequent earthquakes that followed. And in fact, there were over 10,000 earthquakes recorded. But this map plot here demonstrates some very significant aftershocks, and each of these led to a re-evaluation of engineering decision-making and consideration of probabilities going forward. And to give you a feel for the damage in the city itself, 100,000 homes damaged. The central city had 70% of commercial buildings damaged. With respect to infrastructure, 52% of the road network was damaged, 30% of the sewer network. And we had 185 casualties, and to demonstrate our multinational, the nature of our population from 20 countries. Thank you very much for your attention. Certainly I look forward to the further discussion as we progress. Thank you.
Su micro.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Let's see later for the questions. There are, I think, some interesting questions in the room. So go to the last presentation today, and we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has slowed down many economic activities. Even it has stopped some of them. And among them, in several countries, is the building sector. Now we have a presentation of how to manage prevention measures to allow the operational continuity on this sector of building. It will be done by two young engineers from Costa Rica. We have engineer Andrea Chacon. Andrea is an occupational safety and environmental hygiene engineer. She has been holding different positions on the Colegio Federado de Ingenieros y Arquitectos. Currently, she is head of Occupational Health Office. Andrea is a consultant for UNESCO on accessibility and universal design issues. She's accompanied by Ingeniero Marcial Rivera. Marcial is a building engineer and holds a master's degree in disaster risk management and emergency care. His areas of expertise are risk management, statistics, and big data management. Currently, Marcial is head of the process engineering department of the CFIA in Costa Rica. Although the presentation is pre-recorded, Andrea and Marcial are on the room in the room now, so they will be for the discussion after the presentation. We can go ahead, Karim, with the video.
Ya está.
Thank you for this opportunity. Costa Rica is a nation of 61,000 square kilometers, a size similar to Slovakia, that is located in Central America. In recent years, it has stood as an emerging country that is a leader on green economic policy. The economy is based mainly on the provision of services, and in recent years, the installation of industrial zones for the development of medical equipment has become one of the main growth actors. COVID affected every country in the world, and tourism was one of the most affected sectors. Following this example help us to measure the impact. The main airport received 3.1 million passengers and continued to grow, receiving 5.2 million passengers in 2019. During 2020, only 1.6 million people passed through the airport, and therefore, all the rest of the value chains that depends on tourism were affected. What happened in the construction sector? Basically, unlike other past crises, such as the real estate crisis of 2008, this is a health crisis, which affects the economy and therefore affected the investment capacity of individuals and countries. To counteract the effect of COVID, many countries decided to stop productive activities, including constructions. Many commercial activities were stopped in Costa Rica. However, the government decided not to stop the construction sector. Indeed, it was an opportunity for professionals in engineering and architecture to continue with their project and not stop constructions. And the Colegio Federado de Ingenieros y Arquitectos de Costa Rica, CFIA, a WFO member organization responsible for supporting the professional practice of these areas in Costa Rica, took advantage of this window of opportunity. The construction sector represents 5% of the economy. On average, it has registered more than 10 million square meters of construction in recent years. To carry out a construction in Costa Rica, it is necessary for an engineer or an architect professional to register his project through the online CFIA platform. On average, 45,000 construction registrations are made per year. The image summarizes two crises that the construction sector has experienced in less than 50 years. This is the total of square meters that we have registered in the history, and you can see between 2008 and 2009 that the fall of minus 38% that was produced by the crisis of the real estate business in the United States. It affected our economy. And then you can see the crisis of 2020 introduced minus 26% the quantity of square meters that we registered. Of those registrations that are made, the highest percentage of the square meters correspond to housing. Given the natural growth of the population in Costa Rica, there's a need to generate 25,000 new spaces per family per year. It is important to clarify that not all construction registrations that are carried out in the country correspond to new construction. In many cases, they are for remodeling or expanding existing works. And housing, in recent years, new construction represented 77% of all registered square meters, and the value fell in 2020 mainly due to the decrease in the economic capacity of people who could still rent. In the commercial sector, this impact is stronger, and it suffered closures or restrictions on its operations. In many shopping centers, the vacancy rate exceeded values of 10%. This will cause that, for some years, the new construction registered will not grow, since there are enough commercial space built. They will only have to adapt to the new use that it will have, For example, to enable space used as a store to be used as a restaurant. During 2020, the main reduction that occurred is in the Ministry of Public Works. The country had to redirect many of its investment toward systems of aid or assistance to economic sectors that were directly affected by COVID. This would generate problems with the future constructions. Of those 45,000 records that are received on average per year, only 5% of those have been greater than 400 square meters. In larger works, the country regulations require the permanence of an occupational health professional engineer within the project. These are professionals that, due to their academic training, can implement adequate prevention measures to avoid the spread of coronavirus. Thanks to the experiences in managing data, Sophia makes the decision to prepare documentation for small works, less than 400 square meters, so that leading professionals can provide construction workers with technical information in simple language that can be implemented with accessible resources. Now, I would like to introduce you to my colleague, Andrea Chacon. She's a health and safety engineer, and she will address the technical details behind the manual and their importance for the process that I just told you about.
Thank you, Marcia. As you just mentioned, the FIA developed 3 guides for implementation of preventive measures against COVID-19 in the construction sector. For the development of this guide, we worked together with professional engineering and architecture, as well as with government entities, such as the Ministry of Housing. The first guide is called Guide for the Implementation of Prevention Measures against COVID-19 in the construction sector. Construction is more than 400 square meters. This guide focuses on development of less than 400 square meters of construction, especially as indicated previously, and as a part of the studies carried out, it was observed that around 90% of the FIA were smaller than 400 square meters. This allowed us to focus our documentation on those constructions, as land building projects probably had a requirement and a professional in occupational health engineering. This guide proposed some of the following guidelines: an admission protocol, which include a small admission questionnaire, hand washing, and physical distancing at all times, especially when reading, eating, or carrying out work activities. The use of staggered hours, as in case of having a positive COVID case in our areas, will allow for a part of the team to be removed and not the entire team. Constant training in personal hygiene and hand washing. The second guide is called Guide for Implementation of Preventive Measures Against COVID-19 in the Construction Sector, or Inspection for Professionals. This guide was especially focused on professionals who should continue to visit construction sites as part of their work. This document included a verification table to find out the minimum prevention and protection requirements were met during the inspection. Some aspects covered by the guide were the protocol for entering the project site as a visitor, the handling and use of personal protective equipment, physical distancing, the measures to take into account when eating, prevention to disinfect objects or equipment that could be contaminated. The first guide is called Guide for Implementation of Prevention Measures Against COVID-19 in the Construction Sector, Engineering and Architecture Offices, with the goal of keeping continuity to the business and the training of engineering and architecture in Costa Rica. This document was developed to aim at cover the main prevention measures against COVID-19 within offices, areas, and facilities used to offer engineering and architecture services. Some of the aspects covered were cleaning of offices and warehouses, the use and handling of personal protective equipment in offices, safe use of elevators and offices, and work from home as an alternative to avoid occupational exposure to the SARS-CoV-2 virus. With this document, it was possible to reach professionals and collaborators in all areas associated with economic activity of construction to reach the most vulnerable people of economic and construction activity. The CFIA developed joint efforts with various entities to offer different informative materials, banners, lectures, dryers, brief informative spaces. In the same way, streaming was made through the different CFIA social media to bring timely and propagated information to the entire population, especially in the construction sector. There were also forums for the development of alternative solutions for implementation of preventive measures. The information was provided to all construction actors to make sure no one was left behind. To achieve this outreach and training activities were carried out in conjunction with various organizations, including the Ministry of Housing. Among our main strengths, we have several that we can mention. In Costa Rica, we have a strength that, unlike other countries in the regions, access to drinking water is mandatory in all the constructions. It is allowed to have access to hygiene and hydration, which are core aspects when speaking of the pandemic. Another advantage is that Costa Rica counts on professionals in the field of occupational health which are incorporated into the CFIA. According to the regulation and legislation, after 50 people working in a construction project or any company, there must be one, a professional in the area of occupational health engineering, two, an occupational health department, three, an occupational health commission. This organizational structure facilitates decision-making and the timely analysis of solutions and implementation of preventive measures against COVID-19. Proactively, CFIA creates a support email to address the doubts and concerns of professionals from companies with less than 50 employees. Now, what will be the challenges in 2021 in our professions? 1. Maintain safe behavior on our work sites. The knowledge jobs are down. It's very important to understand that some protection mechanisms, such as vaccination, which currently occurs worldwide, is only a means to protect the most vulnerable people according to the threat of exposure, quality, and consequences from the virus. This is not in itself the solution to the problem. The solution is built on safe behavior, efficient hygiene protocols, and awareness of the population to maintain high level of safety and health in our work centers and in different living environments, such as recreation, family, or others. 2. Develop new technologies to improve indoor air quality in closed spaces. And thirdly, the opportunity to develop new technologies to improve indoor air quality in closed areas will be one of the challenges that engineering and architecture professionals must take into account in their design and their various projects. And the point number 3, seek the best level of protection for our working population in terms of personal protective equipment. Achievement, the development of respiratory protection mechanisms and personal protection equipment are more comfortable, economic, and that meet the basic protection needs with an affordable value will be a challenge for each of the countries in the world. We must not forget that for this challenge, engineering professionals from all over the world must be directed and committed in the achievement of all possible solutions. This is an exhortation to continue working for global health from our professions. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much to both. So we start the brief session of questions, and we have some in the room now. For those who want to make a question, still it's possible through the system. You have some links in the chat zone. But right now we have some question for Engineer Eric Ma, and it concerns mostly to the governance of the system. I try to join questions. What is the institution in charge of the land use planning in Hong Kong? And when a disaster strikes, How long does the recovery planning take? It depends, I imagine, on the size, but do they generate a control plan for some other areas with the same pre-disaster conditions? I mean, I think it refers to the use of historical data. These two first, if you may comment, please. Your microphone, please. Put your audio on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Regarding about the institution arrangement for land use planning in Hong Kong, it's evolving because in the early days, when started the first Newtown program in the 1970s, we have one single department responsible for all the Newtown projects. That's what we call the New Territory Development Department. In short, it's NTDD. It had provided all the engineering input, and the town planners was originally a small team under that department. So in the old days, it's fully integrated within one department. As I mentioned earlier, it's mainly for the Newtown program. So it's a very logical arrangement. But subsequently, when the Newtown project was already in the middle stage, some of them already completed, and the others already completed the planning stage. A new department was formed, which is now called the Planning Department. It's responsible for the land use planning, for the overall planning in Hong Kong. So no longer just for the Newtown, but extended the ambit to cover the whole city, including the planning for rural area, for conservation, and also for the control of the old city areas. So that's the institution arrangement on the land use planning. And above it is the Development Bureau. What we mean by bureau is what we call the central government in Hong Kong, central city government. So they are the one on the top layer. So they are the government secretary, the central government. So they manage the planning department underneath. So now planning department is responsible for all the execution, monitoring, and control of land uses. Formulation of policy at the bureau level will be under Development Bureau, which I was formerly the secretary. So that's the institutional arrangement. And even though it's a single department, planning department responsible for planning, but they will draw on the input from other departments. As I mentioned earlier, they will draw input from the Geotechnical Control Office, from the Port and Marine section on the CEDD, Civil Engineering Department, and also they will draw in from the E&M Service Department for the electrical and mechanical installation, like utilities, etc. And also they will draw in the input from the Drainage Department responsible for all the drainage, as I mentioned, so in the example. So it's a multidisciplinary approach, but the Bureau will take a more on the coordination of all this land use planning process. Regarding about the disaster recovery plan, in the whole process, indeed we have a lot of disasters are not the first time encounter. So here have a lot of prepared, or we have made a lot of preparation, and we prepare a lot of scenario planning. So by the time they come in, we can draw in those basic plan we have drawn, and to make adjustment on site by the commander. For example, if it's a typhoon, no matter where it come from, but it's still talking about is the rainfall and also landslide. So that sort of provided emergency response plan can come into play. For some incident, like transportation, maybe at one area we have a severe traffic problem, or even a landslide blocking the critical roads, we have arranged or prepared emergency response for various sections of the whole road network. Because our city is not big, so we can do it by segments. So that's why we can have a very quick response time based on the past, even for the typhoon, severe typhoon. For long-haul typhoon, I think we have confidence we can restore the operation within 2 hours. For severe typhoon, like the last one I mentioned earlier, the Mangu, which is close to a Category 3 hurricane. It took about 24 hours to get the business back and the public transport back to the system. So that's our prepare for the emergency disasters recovery.
Thank you. In New Zealand, there is a concern about the geothermal energy, and that is for Roger. The question is that New Zealand has significant expertise in geothermal energy generation. Would you share with us how these global warming disasters that we will be facing in the coming years will affect your geothermal energy generation infrastructure? And what, if any, actions are you implementing to address them?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. The New Zealand, I'll talk from the electricity perspective first. We have a number of different geothermal resources, and they are distributed to a degree around the North Island. So we've got the benefit of them being distributed in terms of, actually the locations are vulnerable to both volcanic and earthquake activity. But we're not that concerned about that, partly because our electricity system also has quite a number of other renewables, hydroelectric and wind, for example. Geothermal is also used for heating for agricultural purposes. That would be a different issue again. Although we may well have alternates in using bioenergy, for example, for provision of that heat. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, of course. Marcial, do you consider that for this year, 2021, the Costa Rica would arrive to stabilize the economy in relation to the building sector?
I think that's a really good question, because COVID was so unexpected that I think no one can predict exactly what is going to pass. But I think we have signs as a society, because we see people using masks, we see people using systems, we see countries using, believing that this is something that has to be taken seriously. So I think that the economy will recover, because it has happened. The worst path has happened, and we are leaving now emerging with the vaccination all over the world. Some countries are faster than others, but we have vaccination almost in all countries. So I think, yes, we can expect a growth, a recuperation in construction. And I think that as long as we engineers can help other emerging countries, because those are the ones that will have more problems to recuperate the economic sector, we have to share with them the information. For example, the guides that we told you about now, they are public, they can be used for anyone can use. It's our experience. It can be adapted for the experience in that country, but I think that we are going to see a new morning in this and more in next years, but this will be a better year than last year. That's for sure.
Yeah, yes, for sure. But Marlene, please, if something asks you for only one recommendation for that you could make to a country without planning for resilience, so they minimize the suffering and losses due to the global warming, disasters, and so on in the coming years? What would that be?
That's a very big question,
I know.
Jose. Cannot be answered quite simply. Again, I go to the example of New Zealand and compare that with Australia. New Zealand has a very good national approach driven by the government and with a national civil defense emergency management organization. And you can see the structured approach that has flowed through, as mentioned, in local government with lifelines, as mentioned by Roger Flecklough this morning, and and other strategies, including financial. Very important to have the money to make the restoration. So really, this is a leadership approach. In Australia, it is still very fragmented. Each state has its own policy, and we do not have a national policy. We've just had a big inquiry into bushfires and the response there. And again, there has been calls and recommendations for a national approach to bring together the various government agencies, departments, and for a systematic approach. I think this is the most important. This is the first step. From this, everything else will flow and follow. And I think that it's also very important for engineers to be part of that leadership approach, to advocate with government for that systematic approach. As engineers, we are always systematic and look at the numbers, but we really, as engineers, we need to communicate the importance of this in developing that policy. And then from that, all the other benefits will flow and all the other options. So I think that's the most important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Eric and also Roger, have you an idea about how much of the, what's the part of the annual country budget is devoted to disaster risk management and related processes? About what? Your microphone, please.
Yeah, about microphone. Sorry for that. Yeah. In our budget system in Hong Kong, we don't have a specific budget allocated for resilience. But indeed, we have departmental, because we arrange our budget in a departmental basis. So, i.e., each department will have their own budget. And within that budget, they will assign a slice on the emergency resilience. So for some department, they will have, for example, like the police, they will arrange a certain sum of money for the overtime and also emergency preparation and procurement of some material. But this not across all the departments. So we don't have a central budget as such for the emergency readiness. But in the CapEx every year, we spend quite a lot of money in what we call the resilient upgrading. For example, like in the landslide on the geotechnical side, every year we have spent a considerable sum. If every year, I think we are considerable spending about $1 billion US, close to that, on the geotechnical, on stabilize the slopes or the natural terrain preventive measures. But for other departments, this sum will be adding together bit by bit. So I don't have an overall picture, but indeed in Hong Kong, I can assure you our investment on the preparedness and also on the resilience is quite considerable when compared with other cities, because we are very small in scale, but we face a lot of challenges from the hillside, from the steep slopes to the coastal front, and even under the strong wind and thunderstorm, we have a lot of preparedness and money spent on this readiness and resilience.
Yeah, and from a New Zealand perspective, I haven't got any immediate numbers at hand, but to use the 4 Rs framework that Marlene talked about, The third and the fourth are response and recovery. So New Zealand very deliberately has certain funds that it has sitting there all the time available for response, and it has put in place mechanisms which effectively enable funds to flow very quickly should they be required. So they're there to kind of actually, you know, just respond to events when and if they occur. Different sectors of the New Zealand economy, residential is a more specific one. We are very, very highly insured in the global market, so the global reinsurance market. So for example, following Christchurch earthquakes, the total recovery, response and recovery cost is estimated at about $40 billion. Something like 25 billion of that came out of the global insurance market. So that we spend a lot of time and effort maintaining insurance in the global market. Coming back to the first two R's, reduction and readiness. As I said earlier, I can't really put a number on it, but we have a mix of funds which go into the research arena. It's never enough. We always need more. And we do have the main response agency, NEMA, so National Emergency Management Agency, and we are in fact in the process of upgrading that. We've added 24/7 as in continuous monitoring for hazards over the last couple of years, and we're increasing the size of that agency to cope. So they're the direct costs, but there's lots of more less direct costs, let's say, sitting in across other government agencies and private enterprise.
Okay, thank you. We have no much time. I have two short questions, maybe short answers to Andrea. Somebody asked about the building information model, the BIM. Since when this will be obligatory, mandatory in Costa Rica, do you know?
Gracias, doctor Macharé. ¿Me escucha? ¿Sí?
Sí.
Excelente. Gracias, doctor Macharé, doctor Lacanga, a los compañeros panelistas, gracias por esta oportunidad, bueno, a los organizadores y a ustedes, saludarlos. Y bueno, un saludo también a todas las personas que nos siguen por los diferentes medios. Actualmente es positivo el tema en esta oportunidad que vamos a incorporarlo. Está para este año, si Dios lo permite, y esperamos que sea, pues, empezar a hacer nuestros propios indicadores. Creo que es una oportunidad para hacer evaluación también, recopilación de datos y generación de indicadores propios, ¿verdad? Cada país debería tener, ¿verdad?, la oportunidad de desarrollar este tema con su perfil específicamente. Y como buenos ingenieros y profesionales en ingeniería, aplicar el ciclo de Deming constantemente, planear, hacer, verificar, actuar. Eso es lo más importante. No sé si respondí la pregunta, doctor Macharé.
Yes. Just once more is how do the workers, the building workers, did reply face to the new proceeding guide that you present us?
Pues la respuesta fue muy positiva. Logramos llegar como encomienda país a tratar de llegar a todos los diferentes niveles, desde los profesionales de ingeniería en general, no solo los perfiles de seguridad y salud ocupacional, sino toda la diversa gama de representaciones que tenemos en Costa Rica, hasta los colaboradores. Y desarrollamos diferentes espacios de diálogo para llegar a esa población y aclarar las inquietudes, porque como todos al principio en pandemia fue difícil entender mucho el concepto, la información que nos bombardeaba día a día de diferentes, ¿verdad? De situaciones distintas, imágenes que nos llegaban en aquel momento de diferentes países donde personas se desplomaban, no sé si ustedes recordarán, ¿verdad? Se descompensan, caen, y eso inclusive generaba mucho temor, mucho miedo. Entonces fue un acercamiento muy positivo, habilitar diferentes espacios para poder llegar a toda la población y hablar un lenguaje sencillo. Eso es muy importante, tratar de llegar a todos los niveles de la población, de diferentes áreas de trabajo. En este momento, pues hablamos de la actividad económica de la construcción, pero realmente fue muy interesante y habilitamos espacios para ellos. Entonces, en Costa Rica tenemos una figura que se llama maestro de obra, que es una persona que se encuentra específicamente en el área y ya los colaboradores todo el tiempo. Entonces, cuando nosotros habilitamos esos espacios, las inquietudes fueron muy interesantes y logramos llegar de forma adecuada. Pero la experiencia fue muy positiva y ellos tenían muchas inquietudes también, así que lo más importante fue tratar de desarrollar este diálogo en conjunto.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, we are arriving to the end. Before leaving, I have to thank a lot to all of you, Marlene, our speakers, our guests today, also to the team of the Colegio de Ingenieros for the preparation, especially Lisette, that is the secretary of the CDRM, and all the participants. I have seen we have about 300 participants by there in the room, and especially those the members of the CDRM, members of the National Peruvian Committee, and all the countries that has accompanied us today. I leave with you to Ingeniero Carlos Herrera, President of the Peruvian Association of Professional Engineers, to close the event and to have address to us. Adelante, Carlos.
Thank you very much. Good evening from Lima, Peru. It was really very nice to spend 1.5 hours and something minutes more listening, attending a meeting about engineering. And I congratulate especially to the speakers for sharing with us their knowledge, their experience on those fields. There was a very important introduction about the meaning and engineering of the goal of engineers by Gonke and Marlene. When I listen to them, I always learn something new. This is very, very interesting, and I'm certain that all the people that has attended this meeting has gained a lot in their engineering. So, thank you very much. My congratulations to the speakers, to all the participants, and not less for the people who has organized the meeting. For Jose and Lisette, Karim, and all other the people working on it. Thank you very much. Good evening. Until the next time. Bye.
Thank you, Carlos. For those who can open your videos, we can have a final photograph, family photo, please.
Sí, por favor. Si pudieran activar su micro para que no salga apagado y la toma sea mejor. Perfecto. A ver. ¿Podrían desactivar su micrófono? Excelente.
Is it good? It's enough?
Una más, por favor. Disculpe.
One more, okay.
Perfecto, gracias.
Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank
Up to the
you.
next time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.